G'day guys and welcome to the METS Performance Consulting webinar. My name is Luke McElroy and I'm the Director of Sports Science at METS Performance Consulting and stoked to have you on board. So jam-packed full of information today. We're going to go through a lot of concepts. We're going to go through a lot of sports science and how we can use that to improve endurance athlete performance. So really stoked to get involved. Enjoy the free coaching, plenty of information in there, lots of knowledge to absorb. We'll get straight into it. So what can you expect from today? Obviously, you get some free education surrounding human physiology and how it will directly benefit you as an endurance athlete. You'll get education about training zones, how they're measured, what their goals are, and why you should care about them. You'll get the best scientifically proven training methods used to maximize your performance. So that's all we're about at METS Performance Consulting. Everything is based on sports science that's already been proven to benefit performance. So it's nothing new here. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's using proven protocols to get the maximum benefit for minimum training load. You'll learn what VO2 Max, lactate analysis, and training zone identification is all about, why every endurance athlete should get tested, and how it's guaranteed to improve your performance. And if you stay to the end and you like what you see, we're actually offering 1 month of completely free, no obligation online triathlon, cycling or running coaching for the first 50 people to purchase a VO2 Max gift certificate, but a bit more about that later on. All right, so let's talk about some energy systems. So there's actually 3 energy systems that we can use to fuel performance, and one's not mentioned here. So the first one's actually, it's called the ATP-PC system or the phosphocreatine system, and basically this system is used for the first 15 seconds of exercise or for training. So it's just for those sprint-based activities, so your 100-meter track sprint or you're flying 200 around a track, those sort of activities. So once you go past that 15-second period, you actually completely used up those energy stores that you have. So as endurance athletes, we're not too concerned with this energy system because it's not a major limiter to performance. So we're just going to speak about the 2 on screen at the moment. So the first one we'll go through is aerobic glycolysis. So aerobic means with oxygen, and glycolysis just means the breakdown of fuel to create energy. So breakdown of carbohydrates, for example. And the major benefit of aerobic glycolysis is that it creates a lot of energy. So as I've got in the brackets there, it's 34 ATP. Okay, ATP it just means adenosine triphosphate. It's just a unit of energy that's used for the body. The byproducts that we get from aerobic glycolysis is water, heat, and carbon dioxide. So none of this is really going to cause a lot of fatigue. Obviously, heat will eventually. If we get a lot of heat, that's going to cause some fatigue, but nothing compared to the alternative, which we'll go through in a sec. The aerobic glycolysis system is dominant in events lasting more than 2 minutes. So even if that's an 800-meter event, depending on how quickly you do it, or a 1500-meter track event, up to obviously marathon, Ironman, ultra marathon, all that sort of stuff, the aerobic energy system is going to be dominant for any event lasting more than 2 minutes. The major consequence of the aerobic glycolysis system is that it actually creates energy very slowly, which if you think about it, that makes sense. We can't sprint forever. The aerobic system is very much a sub-maximal energy system. Over here, we've got the anaerobic glycolysis. So anaerobic just means creating energy, as we see with glycolysis here, in the absence of oxygen. So we don't actually use oxygen for this one. Benefit is that it creates very little energy, but it creates it very quickly. So we only get 2 ATP molecules out of it, but we get it very quickly. It's used at the beginning of exercise, particularly in that first 15 to 60 seconds. Any sudden bursts of increased intensity, say maybe a criterium race when someone does a breakaway, you have to tap into that anaerobic system there. And also at any high intensity. So anything where you're holding your functional threshold power. So if you're doing like a 5K run off the bike or a time trial for cycling, that's going to be classified as high intensity there. And the byproducts that we get from the anaerobic system is lactic acid, which is made up of lactate and hydrogen, which I'll go through shortly. So these two energy systems, the aerobic and the anaerobic system, they actually work together to create energy depending on what we're actually doing in our training. So what we've got here, this black graph here, this is our energy demand. So that's what we're going to use for the next couple of slides. Anything black is our energy demand. This blue bar here is our aerobic energy supply. Okay, so obviously we can't always supply all of our energy aerobically, as we said. We do have to use the anaerobic sources sometimes because the exercise or the energy demand, as we've got there, can be too high. And this green little graph here is the blood lactate accumulation. Okay, so right at the bottom here, this is an example of what our energy contribution would look like at 50% of our functional threshold power. That's FTP there. So when we're going at a moderately low to moderate intensity, we actually can get 99.9% of our energy from this aerobic supply in the blue here. So if we remember back to what we were just talking about before, the byproducts of the aerobic system is heat, water, and carbon dioxide. So we don't actually accumulate any of this lactic acid, which is seen here. If we go to this next graph, then this is now at 85% functional threshold power. So as you can see, the energy demand in black here has gone up significantly. Our aerobic energy supply, it's still dominant, but because we need energy more quickly now, because our energy demand is higher, we have to tap into this anaerobic energy supply here, which is shown in red. So these two systems, they really work together in conjunction with each other to get this energy demand value over here. But because we have to tap into this anaerobic source, we start to accumulate quite a lot of blood lactate, as we see here. So at any one time, all energy systems are working together to create that energy demand so that we can fuel performance and continue to exercise and train and race at a high intensity. And this last graph I've got for you, this is energy demand here has gone up even further. But what you can see with energy supply is that our aerobic is still where it was. It's sort of at its maximal capacity there. And the anaerobic hasn't been able to pick up the slack enough to bridge this gap there. So this point here at the very top of the red would be called our functional threshold power. So that would be 100% of our functional threshold power. And even if energy demand goes up higher than this, we can't physiologically do that, okay? So what happens is we get flooded with lactic acid, as we see here. That causes a massive amount of fatigue, which I'll go into in a sec, and we have to slow down. We physiologically can't keep going. So this is what 105% of FTP, as we see there. So why does lactic acid cause fatigue? Well, as we mentioned before, lactic acid is actually made up of two molecules, one lactate and one hydrogen ion. It's actually this hydrogen ion which causes blood acidity. For those not familiar with the pH scale, it's a range from 1 through to 14, with 7 being neutral, and it measures the alkalinity and the acidity of a fluid. So 1 is pure acid, 14 is extremely alkaline, and 7 is neutral, right in the middle. And human blood has an optimal pH range between 7.35 and 7.45. An accumulation of hydrogen ions causes this blood pH to drop below 7.35. So pH stands for potential hydrogen. The more hydrogen in a fluid, the closer towards 1 it will go. And the result is that we have these things called mitochondrial enzymes, and they begin shutting down when the blood becomes too acidic. So mitochondria, they're found in the muscles, and their sole responsibility is to create usable energy. So what it does is it actually extracts the oxygen from the circulating blood, takes it into the muscle, and then creates energy with oxygen through that. So if our blood pH is dropping below the optimal range, then these enzymes start shutting off and we can't actually create aerobic energy and we have to slow down. Think of it like trying to make a fire in the snow. It's not an optimal environment. So if you try to build up a big fire in the snow, yes, you'll get the flame going eventually, but it's not going to be anywhere near as big or anywhere near as effective as if we built a fire in hot, dry bushland area, where where the flame can just go nuts, yeah? So it's not an optimal environment to create a fire. But the good news is that we can use this knowledge to improve our performance. So METS 5 training zones. First one we've got is the active recovery zone. The intensity for that is less than 56% of our VO2 max. And the reason that's the case is because the American College of Sports Medicine did a whole heap of studies and they found out that that was the optimal zone for this active recovery zone. The goal of the active recovery zone is just to flush out the hydrogen and to recover more quickly post-training. So this is a very simplistic way of thinking about it. It is a little bit more complicated than just this, but think of it like this. So the aerobic system is creating, or the aerobic glycolysis system is creating energy with oxygen, and the anaerobic system is creating it without oxygen. So if we then train at a very low intensity, less than 56% VO2 max, if you just think it back to that other graph where we had 99.9% of our energy coming from the aerobic system. Okay, so we're actually not introducing new hydrogen and new lactic acid into the system when we work at this sort of intensity. So basic chemistry here, if you have two hydrogens and we get a massive influx of oxygen because we're starting to train at a low sub-maximal intensity, the oxygen is going to attach to these hydrogens, it's going to get H2O, which then converts it to water. H2O is water, okay? So we convert that hydrogen to water. This pushes our pH back up to our 7.35 to 7.45. We've recovered quicker, and where our mitochondrial enzymes start working again, and we can go back to being fully recovered and ready for the next session. So that's a pretty quick but basic overview of that active recovery zone. Next one we've got is the endurance zone, and the intensity for this one is from that 56% VO2 max right up until the intensity immediately prior to producing lactic acid above resting values. So the key thing with this zone is that lactic acid still isn't in the bloodstream above resting values. So we're exercising and training in the absence of lactic acid. And the goal of this zone is to improve our aerobic capacity, or our aerobic engine, or VO2 max. And the way we do that is because, as I said, we're already training in the absence of lactic acid. We know that mitochondrial enzymes are shutting off when we have lactic acid in the system. So if we can avoid doing that, avoid shutting off these enzymes and making sure they're firing at 100%, then they're in an optimal environment for adaptation to grow and adapt. So the type of training you're looking at doing in this is just your long, slow distance stuff. So if you're going out for a 100K ride, or you're going out for a 3-hour run, it's that stuff that people do traditionally very early on in the training program, where you're just trying to build that base engine and just do long, slow, continuous training to build a base ready for the next lot of training where we increase the intensity. Third zone we've got is the threshold zone. So the intensity range for this is now from that first point in which lactic acid accumulates above resting values up until the point where lactic acid entry exactly meets our body's ability to get rid of it. So this is also known as our functional threshold power. And the definition of functional threshold power is the max intensity we can hold theoretically for 45 to 60 minutes. So it's when that lactic acid is in there, the lactic acid's in there at a high amount, so we're right on the limit to what we can do, and our body can just withstand it. Lactic acid entry equals the removal. So if we go any higher, we're in trouble, but we can hold it for that little bit there. So the goal of this zone is actually to improve our functional capacity, or our FTP, and our ability to tolerate and clear hydrogen ions. And the way we do this is just specificity, and it just makes sense. If you train in lactic acid, you're going to become better at tolerating and clearing it. Okay, so again, it comes down to the environment that we put ourselves into. And a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio has been proven time and time again to be a very good ratio to use for this work. So what that means is a work to rest means how much time we spend training compared to how much time we have recovery in between an interval set. So traditional way to do this is it's called long interval training. So an example here is work phase for 5 minutes. We've got energy demand in the black here. We've got lactic acid in the green. Remember, green's lactic acid. So because we're training in the presence of lactic acid, we said we're flooding it in here during this 5-minute work stage. But because we only have 2.5 minutes rest, it just allows for a partial recovery of this lactic acid. So because we only have half the rest, we still have quite a bit of lactic acid in the system. Our energy demand is very low, but we don't just go back to 0 lactic acid straight away. So by only having a 2-to-1 work to rest, we only get a partial recovery. So lactic acid is always in the system throughout this session. And that's really key for this, because if we want lactic acid in this system, if we're training the threshold zone, because again, we come back to what the goal is to improve our ability to tolerate and clear it. So the only way we're going to do that is by keeping it in the body throughout that session. So it's all about improving our FTP for this one. The next zone we've got is the VO2 max zone. And the intensity range from this is from that FTP, or that maximum lactic acid entry equals removal point, right up until we reach 100% of our VO2 max. The goal of this zone is to improve our aerobic power, or our VO2 max. So it's actually got very similar goals to our endurance zone, which was back in zone 2. And the way we do that is because it stimulates mitochondrial growth and adaptation from a different pathway to the endurance zone. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail about how that happens later on. But all you really need to know is that the VO2 max zone works directly in conjunction with the endurance training zone to create a larger aerobic engine and to improve our VO2 max. And the work to rest ratio we're looking for this is a 1-to-1. So that means if you're doing 2 minutes hard, you're having 2 minutes walking recovery. And one thing that we really need to remember here is that, and I haven't put it on the slides, but always 2 to 4 minutes on with the same rest. So if you have 2 minutes on, you're having 2 minutes off. You're having 3 minutes on, you're having 3 minutes off. 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, etc., etc. And this is what the graph should look like. This is like your heart rate graph, or your velocity, how quick you're going graph, okay? So as you can see, we start out, we hit that zone, get right up there, 3 minutes on here, for example, and then we have 3-minute rest, and then we go 3 minutes on, 3 minutes rest, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes rest, okay? And what we're looking for here is time spent at 95% velocity of VO2 max. So velocity meaning speed. So if your VO2 max pace, 100% VO2 max pace was, 3:15 pace, then what we do is we figure out what 95% of that is, which would be around, 3:23 pace. And it's all about time accumulated above that point. And that's why we need to have this rest period, okay? So it's all about accumulating that much time above VO2 max, or above 95% of that VO2 max. And you never want to accumulate more than about 20 minutes of on time. So that could look like 7 sets or 7 repetitions of 3 minutes on and 3 minutes off. And that would be 21 minutes on, 21 minutes off. And you don't want to do any more than that. It's all about quality of this session. If you do too much, well, first of all, you shouldn't be able to, because you're going pretty much flat knacker, and it is a pretty tough session. But you're not going to get any more adaptation by doing more. It's all about quality. So what we often see, common error that we see with people is this, okay? So this graph here, it's the on time is still 3 minutes, but what we're doing is we say, look, more is better, less rest is great, because the harder I'm working, the more benefit and the better workout I'm having, yeah? But it's not the case. So what we see here is we have to start off, we have 3 minutes on, but we only have a 1 minute recovery. Then we go 3 minutes on again, and we have a 1 minute recovery. 3 minutes on, recovery. And as you can see, the on part, or the velocity, is starting to drop because we're starting to fatigue. Key thing, if you take out anything about this zone, the key thing is that we need to hold 95% of velocity at VO2 max to get the desired response. So if we then go draw the line across again, and as you can see, we've hit the first 2, we've made it because we're fresh. And then third, fourth, and fifth one have dropped below this 95% line. So that's not going to improve our goal as much as we could. So it's not going to improve our aerobic power or our VO2 max as much as if we had the extra rest. And what that's actually going to do is shift it back to a threshold focus session. because we had 3 minutes on with only 1 minute off. We're flooded with lactic acid each time. And as a result, the enzymes are shutting off and we can't hold this 95%. So what that's doing is it's just flooding the muscle with lactic acid. It's always in the system. And as we know, lactic acid is not good for mitochondrial growth. So that's why we need to have that 1-to-1 work to recovery or work to rest ratio, so that we can get rid of as much lactic acid as possible. But then most importantly, so we can hold this 95% of VO2 max throughout the training session. And the last zone we've got is the anaerobic zone. So the intensity for this one is above 100% of VO2 max. The goal of this is to improve the functional capacity and our ability to tolerate and clear hydrogen. So you might see a bit of a theme with this one. It does the exact same things as that threshold zone. So they work in conjunction with each other, just like the VO2 max zone and the endurance zone work together. And again, it's all to do with specificity. If we train in lactic acid, we become better at tolerating and clearing it. So with the anaerobic zone, we're looking at a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, or even greater than that. So we could be looking at a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3, which would mean, say, 30 seconds effort with 60 seconds rest, or 30-second effort and 90 seconds rest even, or even just a flat 30-30. So the example here is a work phase of 30 seconds. We see energy demand here in the black. Lactate is, of course, the green. We flood the system full of lactic acid, and then we have a partial recovery. But because we only, not because we have 60 seconds is heaps, but because the energy demand was so high, even with 60 seconds of rest, we have a massive amount of lactic acid in the system. So it's just like the threshold zone. Lactic acid is always in the muscles at every stage throughout this session, which makes us become better at tolerating and clearing it as well. So let's put all these pieces of the puzzle together. I like to think of VO2 max as a bathtub, and it's generally because I can draw it. When people come in, they say, "Oh, what's the go with the bathtub?" And I say, "Oh, look, you can do it. It's the same with a car engine, but I can't really draw a car engine, so I just draw a bathtub." So think of your VO2 max as your bathtub. So let's say at the moment we're an untrained, or let's say we're an untrained individual, but our VO2 max is at 50 mil per kilogram per minute. And I'll actually explain what VO2 max is in a slide soon. So this is our bathtub. So think of it like this. That is the size of our bathtub right now. So that's the size of our aerobic engine. We can turn the tap on and leave it on, but it's not going to fill up any more than it can. Okay, it can't just magically take on more water. It's got a limited size to where it is. So that's our maximal aerobic capacity. That's our VO2 max there. Now, an average individual, they will hit their functional threshold power, which again is that max intensity that they can hold for 45 to 60 minutes at 70% of this VO2 max. So what that really means is that, yes, we have a max. Nobody can hold their 100% VO2 max for more than about 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, you can't just sprint forever, as we know. So that means that they can hold 70% of this 50, for a functional amount of time, so more than 5 minutes. So you can do that for like 60 minutes. So that's when that lactic acid entry exactly meets our body's ability to clear it out. So they've got this much of the bathtub to work with, 70% worth. If we then go off and do some appropriate training for 3 months or so, we can actually expand this overall bathtub. So if we do that VO2 max interval stuff, that 2 to 4 minutes on, 2 to 4 minutes rest at 95% or above, and we do that long, slow, continuous endurance zone training, we can actually increase our VO2 max, increase our aerobic engine, and get it up to, say, 65 mils. So what that sort of training does, the goal isn't to improve your functional threshold power or that functional capacity of that bathtub. It's just to actually build up the bathtub as a whole. So we've built up our maximal aerobic capacity here. In theory, our functional threshold power would still be about 70%, but 70% of 65 is still an improvement over 70% of 50. So you're still improving that that absolute value, that absolute difference. Just the relative is still the same. It's still 70% of 65, but that's still better. If we then go do our threshold training and our anaerobic training, which is all about tolerating and clearing that lactic acid and improving our FTP, then we can actually get that right up to 88 to 94% of our VO2 max. So there was a study done on elite marathon runners not too long ago, and it was shown that throughout the course of a marathon, they could hold anywhere up to sort of 88 to 94% of their VO2 max. Now, obviously, these guys are elite marathon runners. That's what they do. But there's no reason, physiologically, there's no reason why every individual can't get up to this 88 to 94% of whatever their max is. Okay, so it's not going to be elite necessarily, but if your max is only 50 or 45 or whatever it is mils, you can get to 90% of that. If your max is 80 and you can get to 94% of that, then you're probably an elite marathon runner. But it doesn't matter how fit you are or how genetically gifted you are, you can get to this 88 to 94% with the right training. So let's go into what exactly VO2 max actually is. So the definition of VO2 max is it's the maximum volume of oxygen that you can take in, transport, and utilize in 1 minute. So it takes into account all three systems of the body. So it's how much we can take in, so that's how much we can breathe in via the respiratory system, how much we can actually transport via the cardiovascular system and the blood vessels, and most importantly, how much we can actually utilize by the muscular system. So actually taking that oxygen from the bloodstream into the muscles and creating energy that way. It's a key performance indicator for endurance events because the more oxygen that we can use, the harder or the higher intensity we can train without creating lactic acid. So, you know, an elite marathon runner can hold 3-minute pace, and that's actually sub-threshold. They're not even creating that much lactic acid, whereas for an average individual, that's just unheard of. If you're running 3-minute pace, you're probably either almost sprinting or you're well above your functional threshold power and producing quite a lot of lactic acid. So the more oxygen we can use, the harder we can go with less fatigue. Interesting fact is at sea level, 21% of the air that we breathe in is actually made up of oxygen. Only 21%. So the other 79% is actually made of nitrogen and other gases. And at rest, we breathe out approximately 17% of oxygen, which means that we only use 4%. So 21% in, 17% out. So we've actually only used 4% of that oxygen. And when we begin exercising, we obviously know that our heart rate and our breathing rate increases, but so too does our muscular oxygen extraction capacity. So we start going for a run or a ride or whatever it is. Our heart rate increases, our breathing rate increases, but our muscles actually start to extract more oxygen as well, which we can't see. So it's a little bit hard to get a head around it sometimes, but that part is absolutely key. And with appropriate training, obviously our heart and our lungs become more efficient, but so too do our muscles. Our muscles become better at extracting that oxygen, so we can utilize more of that, and therefore we increase our VO2 max. This slide here shows this fraction of expired oxygen graph. So this is all to do with how much oxygen these mitochondria are taking from that bloodstream and using to create energy. So this is actually some real data that I took the other day from a client. And if you have a look up here, we said that we breathe in 21% oxygen at sea level, and if at rest, this 17% is where that line would look. So if we weren't exercising, we would expect that to be pretty much flatlined across this 17% here. As you can see, within the first 30 seconds of exercise, we've already reduced that by what's that? Almost 2%. Yeah, so probably 1.8% down. So we've gone from that 17 down to about 15.2%. So that's quite a significant decrease. And what that means is that we're breathing in 21%. Now we're breathing out, say, 15.2%. We're actually extracting more oxygen from the surrounding blood per minute. So as you can see, it starts out at 15%. It stays like that for quite a while, and then we get to a point where it starts to go back up closer to baseline. So what this is showing here that is as intensity gets harder, we're breathing in the air and the oxygen, but our muscles don't have the capacity to actually use any more of it. So you see right at the end of this maximal exercise test, this would be running at 330 pace for this individual. We're pretty much back at resting value. So we're breathing in a lot of air. We're probably breathing 150 liters of air here, but because we have a physiological limit, so our muscles, although we're taking in more air and more oxygen, we can't actually utilize that by the muscles. But the good thing is that we can actually change this graph, which I'll go through in this next slide. So let's explore that fraction of expired oxygen concept in a little bit more detail. So I want you to imagine this slide as being an actual muscle, inside a muscle, think of your quadricep or whatever it is. So this is inside muscles and inside muscle fibers. Inside these muscles, we have these things called mitochondria. And excuse the pictures, I found them on Google Images, much better than me trying to draw them. So these here are mitochondria. Okay. As I said before, their sole responsibility is to take oxygen from the bloodstream into the muscle and to create energy through these mitochondria. And I like to think of mitochondria as sort of a turnstile effect. So it's sort of a one in, one out process. So picture this. Let's say we're breathing in 100 oxygen molecules. So that's via the respiratory system. We then circulate this 100 oxygen molecules via the cardiovascular system, and they arrive at the muscles ready to be used up. Okay. Now we only have 5 of these mitochondria in the muscle. So because the body is a very fussy machine, it's not gonna take in more oxygen than it can use. So in theory, these oxygens are gonna start lining up one by one and having a one in, one out sort of process. But because the body is so tightly regulated, what it's going to do is it's only going to take up what it can use. So it's going to take up 5 oxygen molecules, and we're actually going to breathe out the other 95. Okay, so that's where that fraction of expired oxygen graph comes into. But what we can do is if we do the appropriate training, so like I said, we do that endurance, long, slow stuff, and we do those VO2 max intervals, we can actually improve this over time. So let's say we've done, our 3 months of training, whatever it is, and we've done the endurance stuff, we've done the VO2 max intervals. What actually happens is these mitochondria, they can increase in number, size, and surface area. So what we've got now is we've got 10. So we've gone from having 5 to having 10, and these have actually become a lot bigger. And because they've become bigger, they can do 2 at a time turnstiles. So I like to think of it, like a hotel. You've got those, some of them have like 1 turnstiles and some of them have 2 at a time. So I'm saying this is a big hotel and they can go through 2 oxygen molecules at a time. So if everything else was exactly the same, let's say we take in that 100 oxygen molecules, we breathe it in, we circulate the 100 to the muscles, but now we've got 10 mitochondria, which are now bigger than they were before. So we can actually utilize 20 of these oxygen molecules, and as a result, we only have to breathe out 80 of them. And this directly affects that graph we saw before. So in theory, what would happen with this graph is this is what we were, prior to training. That's our graph there. We've gone and increased the number, size, and surface area of mitochondria. We can now take in more oxygen. So what that's going to do is that's going to push the curve right down to, 13, 14%. It'll have a similar looking curve, but we've pushed it down the chart. So it looks something like that. Yeah. So look, physiologically, there is a limit to everything, okay? We're not going to get this number down to 0%. We're never going to use all of the oxygen that's being circulated in the body, but the really elite guys use a large proportion of it. So we're looking at like the 11, 12, 13% compared to, this 15.5, which is actually pretty decent for, an averagely fit person. So the really elite guys can push this right down here. And if they can push that graph down, that means that they can actually lower their heart rate. The heart rate becomes lower and their respiratory rate also decreases as well, because out of that circulating oxygen, they're actually extracting a higher proportion of that. So as a result, they can actually decrease their heart rate and decrease their respiratory flow or their breathing rate. and still get the same amount of oxygen into the muscles. So that's obviously going to directly affect VO2 max and improve our endurance performance. So that's pretty much what I've got for you in terms of the free content there, and a little bit of a rundown on training zones and a bit of the science behind all that. So this last two slides, I just want to go through about how METS Performance Consulting can help you as an athlete. And basically the only way to determine your training zones is through lab testing. So these generic equations, they just don't work. 220 minus your age, or 180 times by 0.6 plus whatever it is. They're very generic, and everybody is very, very different. I've had people come in. I've had 50-year-old ladies come in who can get their heart rate to 198, which is theoretically based on these equations not possible. I've had 25-year-olds come in who can't get their heart rate above 145. So the only true way to get these training zones is to measure it directly in a lab, especially with this lactic acid sort of stuff. Your VO2 max and lactate analysis, it's going to help identify those training zones. So that's what we specialize in. You come in, you do your test, you get your data, we figure out your zones. Another benefit is that you'll learn your current level of aerobic fitness and also that functional threshold power. So if you've got a race coming up, for example, and you want to know how hard you can go, well, we can tell you exactly what heart rate you can go at, or exactly what pace you can go at, or exactly what power you can hold on the bike, for example. Another key thing is that we'll identify all your physiological strengths and weaknesses. So all that data we saw, or not that we show, I didn't show you a whole heap there, but we get 14 graphs, which we compare against each other, and we can identify whether you need to do more endurance zone training and that VO2 max stuff, or maybe your thresholds, you can't resist threshold very well, so you need to do more threshold and anaerobic stuff. We can actually pinpoint from that data exactly what sort of training protocols you need to follow to maximize your performance and to achieve your goals. We'll also prescribe appropriate training advice and or programs tailored specifically from your data to turn your weaknesses into strengths and smash your PB. So as I said, it's all about maximum benefit for minimum load. We will make every session count, and we will scientifically and periodically push you towards your goal, which leads into the last point. No matter what fitness level you are, the information that you receive will allow you to train smarter. It'll make every minute count, and it'll get you to your goals as quickly as physically possible. So a common error, I'm not going to say error, a common reason that people don't want to come in straight away is because they say, look, I'm not fit at the moment, I want to get peak fitness before I come in and do this test. Well, you don't need to be fit. If all you're interested in is that VO2 max value, then fine. Yes, you do need to be fit if that's all you're interested in, but it's all about getting you as close to your goal and as humanly possible, and physically peaking you towards that. So if you're starting out a program, if you're halfway through it, or if you're peaked, it's going to benefit you at every stage of the program, because you're going to get your training zones, and then you're going to be able to train specifically to your physiology so that you can get maximum benefit in minimum training time. And it's all about making every session count. So we stick to the VO2 max zone above 95%, because we know we're going to get 100% benefit of that session. If we play around with that work to rest ratio and we can't hold that 95%, we might only get 60% of that session, which means you then have to go make up that other 40%. So it's all about nailing every session according to science, been scientifically proven, so that every session counts and that you get 100% benefit from every session, so that you can actually spend less overall time training while maximizing your performance. And look, we're all busy here. We all work full time. None of us are elite athletes, or maybe some of you are, but I don't know, the majority aren't. It gives you more time to get back to your family, get back to your work. You smash out an hour here or an hour and a half there, and that's it for the day. You move on. You only get fitter when you recover. And that's a fact. It's all about get a stimulus. So get the training stimulus, go and recover. Get the stimulus, go and recover. If you don't recover, you don't get better. It's like watering a flower. I've said that a few times. It's all about watering a flower. So just think the flower is The flower is you, yeah? So if you go plant a seed and you want it to grow, all right, it needs appropriate stimulus and it needs appropriate time. So you can water the crap out of it. You keep watering it as much as you want. If you don't give it time, it's not going to grow and it's not going to adapt. You can't force it just to grow. It needs time and it needs appropriate sunlight. It needs appropriate water. Yeah. If you overwater it or you take it out of the sun, then it's going to die. It's not actually going to grow at all. So it's all about finding that balance between optimal stimulus and optimal adaptation. Get the right amount of water and the right amount of sunlight. Give it time to grow, and then we get maximum benefit. So don't over volumize yourself and risk injury. The common thing, 90% of runners get injured. I think 80% get an injury every year from overuse. So don't over volumize. Smash and nail every session so that you don't have to get injured, but you still get maximized performance. So that's a little bit what we're about. And up until Christmas only, okay, so the first 50 people, and I think we've only got about 30 spots left because people have responded to this free coaching really well, is up until Christmas, first 50 or 30, whatever we've got left, to purchase a VO2 Max gift certificate will also receive 1 month of free, no obligation online triathlon, cycling or running coaching directly from me, okay? So this is actually coming straight from the Director of Sports Science. What you get is you receive a Training Peaks account. So it's all done online. So whether you're, in country Victoria or whatever, Geelong, doesn't matter. You just need to come in and get that test done, and then it's all done online via Training Peaks. Every session for the month's uploaded and it's accessible via like a phone application or desktop computer. We give you a highly tailored, or very, very highly tailored training sessions based specifically on your testing data, which is all backed by sports science research to ensure maximum benefit with minimum load. So this is really, really elite level training, okay? And you can have it for free. You have a weekly phone call to monitor progress, and that will probably be with me, that weekly phone call. So we'll have a chat for 10, 15 minutes just to see how you're going. Any questions you've got, I'm happy to answer them, of course. And this is all valued at $200, and we're giving it away completely free for anyone who gets that gift certificate, okay? And at the end of the program, you're free to leave. Like I say, no obligation. There's no obligation at all for this. We're giving it away because we know our training programs are the best that you can get. We go by sports science. It's all proven. We have a 100% success rate in our athletes. They all get fitter. And we're giving it away for free just so you can try it out, because we know that a large proportion are going to stay on as clients because they like what they get. They see the improvement straight away. We cut the crap and there's no junk kilometers. It's just straight to the point. Get the stimulus, get the result, go live your life, maximize your performance. Yeah. So there it is, $200 completely free. Try it for a month. If you don't like it, that's fine. You've got some good knowledge and some good experience, and you can go off and do your other training. And then if you want to stay on, then we can talk about that at a later date. So there you have it, guys. That's it for the METS Performance Consulting webinar. So look, really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some valuable information out of this, and you can use that and directly implement in your own training. And please, if you're interested in VO2 Max testing or this free coaching, then click on the link below. It'll take you to a landing page. It has a heap more information. It also has the way that you can book online and also get in contact if you have any more questions. So thanks again, and good luck with it.